When Caitlin Clark entered the WNBA, the world expected fireworks. She was supposed to be the next face of women's basketball, the one who would change everything. Every headline called her a savior, and every camera followed her every move. Her arrival wasn't just a debut, it was a phenomenon, the kind that pulls an entire league into the spotlight. But inside the Indiana Fever locker room, things weren't as perfect as they looked from the outside. There were quiet tensions, unspoken rivalries, and moments of loyalty that no one ever saw. And in the center of it all stood two names, Caitlin Clark and Lexie Hull. The media wanted drama. They wanted to pit teammates against each other, rookie against veteran, fame against foundation. They wanted a story that could trend overnight. But the truth was far more complex, built not on envy or ego, but on survival. Two athletes navigating fame, failure, and expectation in a league that rarely forgives weakness. Lexie Hull could have joined the noise. She could have stepped back, rolled her eyes at the cameras, and fed the narrative of a team divided. Instead, she chose loyalty. When reporters twisted Caitlin's words, Lexie told her not to read the comments. When fans questioned Caitlin's attitude, Lexie reminded her of the grind, the years of sacrifice that got her here. She didn't just defend Caitlin publicly, she protected her privately. There were nights when Caitlin left the court in silence, her shoulders heavy with pressure. She'd scroll through headlines calling her overrated, then see one text from Lexie. "You've got this. Tomorrow's another chance." It wasn't loud, it wasn't performative, but it mattered. Because sometimes loyalty doesn't roar, it whispers. The story of Caitlin Clark and Lexie Hull isn't about rivalry, it's about resilience. It's about two women learning that fame doesn't divide strong people. It reveals who's truly standing beside you when everything starts to crack. While the world focused on points, headlines, and sponsorships, the real story was unfolding quietly behind closed doors. The story of loyalty that kept the Fever from falling apart. The pressure on Caitlin Clark grew heavier with every game. Every missed shot became a headline. Every frustrated glance became a viral clip. The spotlight that once felt like a dream started to burn, and soon it became clear. This wasn't the same adoration she had in college. This was scrutiny, and it was merciless. Critics didn't just question her performance, they questioned her personality. They said she was too confident, too emotional, too outspoken for a rookie. Some called her a prodigy, others called her a problem. And in between those extremes, Caitlin tried to breathe. The noise outside the locker room grew so loud it began to seep inside. Whispers about favoritism, tension, and chemistry started to circulate, not from players, but from people who didn't understand what it means to share a team under pressure. The Fever were fighting for wins, but they were also fighting for peace. Lexie Hull never said much publicly, but her presence said everything. She wasn't chasing interviews or headlines. She wasn't trying to compete with Caitlin's spotlight. She had seen what pressure can do to young athletes, how fame can turn into isolation overnight. So she decided to become the anchor. Caitlin noticed. She saw how Lexie quietly took the blame during team interviews, deflecting questions that could stir controversy. She noticed how Lexie offered advice during film sessions, reminding her that leadership isn't about who scores most. It's about who stays calm when everyone else loses balance. When social media mocked Caitlin's reactions or body language, Lexie was often the first to respond with encouragement, not sympathy. And yet, even with that loyalty, the outside world still tried to pit them against each other. Analysts speculated that the team's veterans resented the attention Caitlin was getting. Every time the Fever lost, someone blamed chemistry. Every time Caitlin scored, someone called her selfish. But the truth was more human and far more powerful. Behind closed doors, the Fever were learning to adapt. Caitlin was learning that leadership doesn't come from fame, it comes from accountability. Lexie was learning that silence can be stronger than any speech. Together, they began to shift the energy in that room, one conversation at a time. After one particularly brutal loss, Caitlin sat alone long after the arena emptied. Reporters waited for her, quote, cameras lingered, but she said nothing. Then Lexie walked in, sat beside her, and said quietly, "You don't owe them perfection. You just owe them your game." Those words hit harder than any headline. Because for the first time in weeks, Caitlin felt understood. That moment changed everything. It wasn't the kind of moment fans see or analysts record, but it was real. And it was the start of a bond that would define their season. Because when fame tries to divide, loyalty is the only thing strong enough to hold the line. The turning point didn't come with a buzzer beater or a viral highlight. It came quietly, buried in frustration, during a stretch of losses that tested everyone's patience. The Indiana Fever were tired, overanalyzed, and emotionally drained. Every press conference felt like a judgment. Every game, a referendum on whether Caitlin Clark was living up to the hype. But something was changing, slowly, almost invisibly. Instead of letting the outside noise fracture them, the Fever began to pull closer. It wasn't about speeches or team meetings. It was about small moments, an extra pass, a silent nod, a shared glance after a hard possession. Caitlin and Lexie started leading not through words, but through example. Caitlin had learned that the spotlight was never going away, but she could decide what it meant. She stopped performing for approval and started playing for pride. Her joy began to return, one shot, one assist at a time. She wasn't chasing headlines anymore. She was chasing connection. Lexie, on the other hand, began to rise in ways no camera could capture. Her presence steadied the team during chaos. Her defense grew sharper, her communication louder. And when younger players looked lost, she guided them with patience instead of frustration. For the first time, fans began to see the unspoken chemistry between her and Caitlin, a bond that wasn't built on similarity, but on shared struggle. Then came a game in early July, one that would rewrite their season's story. The Fever trailed by double digits. The energy in the arena was slipping. Caitlin looked exhausted, burdened by the weight of expectation. During a timeout, Lexie stepped in. She didn't give a speech or yell. She simply looked Caitlin in the eyes and said, "You're not alone. You never were." It was short, but it landed like thunder. When play resumed, something ignited. Caitlin hit 3 straight threes, each one louder than the last. The crowd came alive, the team followed, and the Fever completed the comeback. But even in victory, what mattered most wasn't the score, it was the shift. Caitlin didn't point to the crowd that night. She pointed to Lexie. That moment, unseen by most, said everything. It was gratitude, recognition, and respect, all rolled into one silent gesture. From that night on, everything felt different. The Fever weren't just playing basketball, they were rebuilding trust. Reporters noticed a new energy. Players smiled more. The locker room felt lighter. The team had found its balance, its chemistry, its heartbeat. The media, once obsessed with division, finally began to see unity. They stopped writing about drama and started writing about growth. And for the first time all season, the Indiana Fever weren't a story about potential. They were a story about belief. For Caitlin, redemption wasn't about proving critics wrong. It was about proving herself right. For Lexie, redemption meant being seen not as a supporting act, but as the quiet force that kept the dream alive. Together, they redefined leadership, not through fame or words, but through trust, humility, and loyalty. In a world chasing attention, they showed the strength of quiet consistency. And when the final buzzer sounded that night, the Fever had done more than win a game. They had won themselves back. When the season finally came to an end, there was no championship parade, no glittering trophy waiting in the locker room. But for the Indiana Fever, that year meant something deeper. They hadn't just rebuilt a team, they had rediscovered their soul. Caitlin Clark walked off the court that final night, under a mix of cheers and silence, knowing she had survived something far greater than a season. She had survived the pressure of being the face of a movement. The spotlight that once felt like a burden now felt like a responsibility, not to the media, but to every girl watching, dreaming, believing. Lexie Hull stood beside her. Same calm expression, same quiet dignity. She wasn't in the center of the camera frame, but that didn't matter. Her leadership had never been about volume. It had always been about presence. When others saw chaos, she saw opportunity. When others chased attention, she chose purpose. The media, so quick to create conflict, began to see the truth. Their rivalry had never been about competition. It had been about contrast. Caitlin's fire and Lexie's calm had become the perfect balance. The kind of chemistry that can't be manufactured, only earned through mutual respect. It wasn't the story anyone expected, but it became the one everyone needed. Their bond became a reminder that loyalty isn't weakness, it's power. In a sport driven by stats and contracts, the connection between these two athletes reminded the world that leadership has many forms. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's quiet, but it always leaves a mark. For Caitlin, the greatest lesson wasn't about fame, it was about grace. How to handle pressure with poise, how to stay human when everyone treats you like a headline. And for Lexie, it was about the strength of knowing her worth even when the world wasn't looking. Together, they became more than teammates. They became proof that in an era of noise, authenticity still resonates. They showed that real strength is built in silence, and real legacy is built in loyalty. Years from now, fans will remember the highlights, the records, the comeback games, but the true fans, the ones who looked deeper, will remember the bond that held it all together. Two women, different paths, same purpose. One building the spotlight, the other steadying it. That's how the Fever found their heartbeat again. Not through fame or rivalry, but through unity. Because loyalty doesn't shout, it stands, it waits, it endures. And when the world forgets the noise, it's the loyalty that remains. As by the lights dimmed in the arena that night, Caitlin lingered for a moment, looking back at the court that had both tested and transformed her. She could still hear the echoes of fans chanting her name, but what touched her most was something quieter. Lexie's hand on her shoulder, steady, wordless, grounding. It wasn't about the cameras or the commentators anymore. It was about the journey, the bruises, the belief. Lexie smiled, and for a second, everything, the headlines, the pressure, the rumors, disappeared. There was just basketball. Two women who loved the game so much, they gave it everything, even when the world misunderstood them. That night, in the locker room, the team didn't talk about what they lost. They talked about what they gained: trust, growth, sisterhood. And for the first time, the Fever weren't just a team trying to win games. They were a family rewriting their story. As the season faded into history, something magical happened. Little girls started showing up at Fever games holding signs that read, "Play like Caitlin, lead like Lexie." Parents whispered that maybe, just maybe, their daughters didn't have to choose between being strong and being kind. They could be both. That was their real victory. Not on the scoreboard, but in the hearts they inspired. Because fame fades, records break, and trophies collect dust. But character, that's what stays. And in the end, that's what Caitlin Clark and Lexie Hull built together. Not a rivalry, not a storyline, but a legacy rooted in respect, courage, and the kind of loyalty that outlasts every headline. In a world obsessed with fame, Caitlin Clark and Lexie Hull reminded everyone that greatness isn't about who shines the brightest. It's about who stands beside you when the lights go out. Because long after the cheers fade, loyalty still echoes.